So I was through hiking in Vermont, part of a solo stretch I'd been planning for months. I'd started early that morning, coming off a solid night's rest at a lean-to shelter, and the air had been just cool enough to keep me moving at a steady pace. It was one of those early fall days where the trees were just starting to burn red and orange, but the sun still had a bit of summer warmth in it. I checked the trail guide after breakfast and saw the next shelter listed as 5 miles ahead. I figured I'd push to make it there by late afternoon and maybe get a spot in the shelter itself before it filled up. 5 miles isn't much when you're fresh. The thing is that 5 miles turned out to feel like 10. I don't know if it was mismarked or if the elevation changes messed with my perception, but the trail just dragged. It was rocks, roots, inclines, then long stretches of winding trail that didn't seem to lead anywhere. I kept thinking the shelter must be just around the next bend, but it never came. The white blazes, those small patches of paint on trees and rocks that marked the trail, started to feel like they were leading me in circles. And by the time the sun started dipping low, I realized I had misjudged badly. I picked up my pace, but my legs were burning. I'd already done enough miles that day, and I wasn't as sharp as I'd been that morning. The shadows started stretching long, and then the woods got dark fast. The canopy above was thick in this section, and even though the moon was nearly full, it didn't help much. I had my headlamp on, but it was dim. The batteries were older than I realized. Then the wind started. Not a soft breeze either. It was a constant, loud whooshing through the trees, bending the branches and howling like it had anger. Every gust made the leaves dance like whispers all around me. I kept hearing cracks, branches or maybe trees shifting, and each time I stopped in my tracks, heart thudding in my ears, expecting something to come crashing down. I started to wonder if I had passed the shelter and missed it. The idea of doubling back made my chest tight. I felt alone in the worst kind of way, out there in the dark, cold wind cutting through my sweat-damp clothes, unsure if I'd find a place to sleep at all. Finally, after what had to be close to 9 or 10 miles total, I saw the outline of a structure. Relief hit me so fast I almost dropped to my knees. It was the shelter, but when I got close, I saw headlamps shining from inside and voices. Too many voices. The lean-to was completely full. Sleeping bags lined up edge to edge like a packed subway train. I tried the tent pads nearby, but they were taken too. I counted at least 4 other tents in the clearing. There was no room. I stood there in the dark for a minute, trying to breathe, trying to think. I could keep walking, but the next shelter was way too far. I could sleep right there on the trail, but I knew that wasn't smart. So I started bushwhacking a bit, off to the side of the trail and maybe 50 or 60 yards past the shelter. Far enough to find some space, but not so far that I couldn't find my way back in the morning. I found a slight clearing. Not perfect, a bit sloped, some roots under the leaf litter, but it was the best I could manage without spending all night searching. I set up my small one-man tent, trying to work fast in the dark. The wind made it tough. I had to brace the poles more than once from being ripped out of my hands. I was terrified a branch would come down on me in the night. You hear those horror stories about hikers getting crushed by widowmakers. I kept shining my light up at the trees above my tent, scanning for dead limbs. My hands were shaking as I cooked a fast dinner, ramen and a protein bar. I barely touched it. My stomach was twisted up from stress. After I hung my food bag on a branch a ways from camp, standard bear precaution, I crawled into the tent and zipped it tight. I didn't even bother changing clothes. I was too cold and too freaked out. Inside the tent, the noise of the wind got louder. The thin fabric barely kept the sound out. Every few minutes, something would creak or pop in the woods, and I'd jolt upright, ears straining. I couldn't see anything out there. It was like being buried in a paper bag, blind and helpless. I thought about how far I was from help, how long it would take anyone to find me if something happened. The fear wasn't sharp. It was dull and heavy, like a stone sitting in my chest. I lay there, stiff as a board, until sleep finally dragged me down. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but it was still dark. My watch said a little after 4. What woke me wasn't the wind this time. It was something softer. Footsteps. I held my breath. At first, I thought maybe I dreamed it. Then I heard it again. 2 sets of footsteps. crunching softly through the leaf litter. Not fast. Slow, steady. Approaching. My blood went ice cold. They weren't on the trail. They were out where I was off path, far from where people had any reason to be. That was the part that hit hardest. No one should have even known I was there. I hadn't even used a headlamp when I left the shelter clearing. I hadn't spoken to anyone. I didn't even cough when I set up. The footsteps came closer. Then they stopped right outside the tent. Silence. They didn't say anything. No hello, no surprise at seeing a tent. Just quiet. I could hear them breathing. Maybe I imagined that, but it felt real. Then I heard one of them shift, crunch away a few feet, and the other went the opposite direction. They were on both sides of me now. I reached slowly into the side pouch of my sleeping bag and pulled out my knife. Just a small one, maybe 3 inches, foldable. Felt like nothing in my hands. My palms were wet. I didn't breathe for what felt like minutes. I knew my food bag was outside, and I needed that. If I lost it, I couldn't keep going. I didn't want to stay in the tent and wait to die, stabbed through the nylon or dragged out like prey. I needed to do something, so I made a choice. I unzipped the tent just an inch, then 2, then slow, steady all the way. I kept my head low and poked it out fast, ready to lunge or run or scream. But it wasn't people. It was 2 moose, 2 young ones by the look of it. Tall and broad, legs like tree trunks, heads like horses with swollen snouts. They were standing maybe 10 feet away on either side of my tent, their eyes wide, reflecting my dim headlamp beam like dull glass. One snorted, ears twitching. The other shifted its weight, hooves thudding deep into the soft forest floor. Couldn't even move. I was frozen there, half out of my tent, knife in one hand, staring at these massive animals that had the power to turn me into paste with a single charge. They were just watching me. I didn't move, didn't speak, just stayed perfectly still. Then, without warning, they bolted. Both moose turned and crashed through the underbrush, hooves pounding like drums. The sound of their retreat shook the ground under me. Branches snapped, leaves flew, and within seconds, they were gone. I sat there, stunned. I was shaking so hard I nearly dropped the knife. I looked around, nothing else in sight, just empty woods and rustling trees. But I couldn't shake the fear that they might come back. Or worse, that something else might come. Maybe the scent of my food would bring a bear. Maybe someone was out there and just hadn't shown themselves yet. I didn't wait to find out. I packed up in less than 10 minutes. Tent, sleeping bag, everything jammed into my pack. I didn't bother eating or checking for leftover gear. I just grabbed my food bag, slung everything on my back, and took off down the trail with my headlamp barely giving me 20 feet of light ahead. The woods were still dark, still windy, but I moved like my life depended on it. Every crack of a branch made me flinch. I checked behind me a dozen times, heart hammering. I don't even know how long I hiked. Maybe an hour, maybe 2. Just walking, fast and focused, until the sky started lightening behind the trees. When I finally reached the next shelter, I saw 2 hikers boiling water by the fire ring. They looked up, nodded. I didn't say much, just dropped my pack, took a breath, and sat down hard on the cold bench. Later that morning, I checked my gear. Everything was there. No claw marks, no scratches, just some dirt and crumpled corners. I made coffee, forced down a granola bar, and sat in the sun while my hands stopped shaking. I didn't tell anyone what happened. Not the other hikers, not my friends when I got home. Maybe because it sounded stupid, being scared out of my mind by 2 young moose. But in that moment, in the dark, with those footsteps circling my tent and no idea what was out there, I truly believed I wasn't going to make it out. It reminded me that the woods don't care who you are, how experienced you feel, or how good your gear is. They'll humble you fast. And fear, the real kind, isn't flashy. It's slow. It builds. Crouches next to you in the dark and waits. That morning, walking away from that spot under a bruised gray sky, I told myself one thing I still repeat whenever I head into the backcountry. Don't ever get too comfortable. I was hiking the CDT in Colorado, heading north from Dillon and Silverthorne. probably a day out, maybe a little more. It was late June, and the snow was mostly melted except for some patches on the higher slopes. The sun was hot in the afternoons, but mornings were still cold. I'd been on trail for a while already and had found my rhythm. Wake up at first light, break camp quickly, and get moving before the sun hit hard. Most days I didn't see anyone, and that's how I liked it. I didn't mind talking to people here and there, but I mostly hiked alone and didn't like being around folks for too long. I liked the quiet. That day, I'd been working my way through a section with some deep creek crossings. The trail dipped down into a little gully where a creek was running high and fast from the snowmelt. The official trail crossing looked rough, stones slick with moss and too far apart to step across easily. I stood there for a while, trying to figure out the best route across, checking downstream a little for a better spot. I didn't want to get my shoes soaked, and I definitely didn't want to fall in. As I was standing there, another hiker came up behind me. He looked a little older than me, maybe mid-30s, wearing a beat-up sun hoodie and a small beard that looked a few weeks old. He said nothing at first, just nodded at me and scanned the creek. After a minute, he stepped off trail a bit and said something like, "Better crossing this way." He was right. 20 feet downstream there were some wider rocks, and someone had placed a small log. I followed and crossed without much trouble. We stood on the other side for a few seconds, catching our breath. I said thanks, he nodded, and we ended up walking together for maybe 20 minutes, talking about the snowpack, the views, typical trail stuff. I told him I was camping soon. He said he might too. No big deal at that point. I stopped a mile or so later when I found a decent flat spot tucked into a stand of trees. The ground was soft enough, and I was close to a little trickle of water that was still flowing. I pitched my tent and cooked dinner, instant mashed potatoes with olive oil, the usual. As I was finishing up, I saw the guy from earlier setting up about 40 yards away. I didn't think much of it. The sun was dipping, and there weren't many flat spots around. It made sense. Next morning, I was up before first light, like always. I packed up quietly and was gone before he even unzipped his tent, or at least before I heard anything from his direction. The trail climbed hard that day, up a long slope through thick trees, then opened onto a high ridge. Beautiful views, snow in the shaded creases of the peaks, marmots whistling across the rocks. I was moving slow from the climb, but enjoying the solitude. Maybe an hour later, I heard footsteps behind me. It was the same guy catching up. He fell into step right beside me like we'd agreed to hike together. I didn't say anything at first, didn't want to be rude, but after a while he started talking like we were a pair now. He said stuff like how it was nice hiking with someone for a change, and how company makes the miles go faster. I gave polite answers but didn't return much. Then he started talking about how we could hike the rest of the trail together, how we could plan resupplies and meals, and maybe even save money splitting groceries. I told him I had plans to get off trail here and there, see some friends, visit towns off route. I made it up on the spot, hoping he'd take the hint. He didn't. He just kept talking about how he was a good cook, how we could take turns filtering water or setting up camp, how he liked having someone to talk to. I said I was a picky eater and liked going at my own pace. He laughed it off. I changed my pace, sped up, slowed down, but he matched everything. Even when I stopped to get water or pee, he waited for me. By the time we hit the long road walk past Pettingell Peak, I was fed up. That section is rough, wide open, exposed, nothing but rock and dust. The climb toward the pass near Vasquez is steep and miserable, and I used that to try and lose him. I pushed hard, faster than I normally go, barely stopping to catch my breath. I figured he'd drop off eventually. I glanced back now and then. He was struggling, red in the face, breathing hard, but he kept pushing, never letting more than a few hundred yards open up between us. Then, as I crested the top and slowed a little, he caught up again. He said something like, "You're really pushing hard, man," and laughed like it was a joke. Then he said I was being mean, that I should wait up, that we were partners now. I didn't answer. I didn't even look at him. I just kept walking. The trail curved around Vasquez Peak after that. The sun was going down behind the ridges, and I stopped for a second to dig out a bar and some nuts from my hip pocket. He caught up again. This time he didn't even ask. Just dropped his pack a few feet from mine and started talking like we were definitely camping together. He said something like, It just makes sense to share a tent tonight. Less work, less weight to pack in the morning. Warmer, too. I didn't say a word. I picked up my stuff, put the food back in my pocket, buckled my pack, and walked. I didn't even glance back. I went fast, backtracking around the curve of the mountain and then dropping straight down a steep slope. No trail, just brush and loose rocks and the sound of my boots slamming into the ground. I don't know how long I kept that pace. Maybe 30 or 40 minutes, but eventually I found a forestry road below. The light was fading. My legs were shaking from the descent. I didn't stop. I followed the road downhill, moving fast even as it got dark. I had my headlamp, but I kept it off until I really needed it. After a couple miles, the smell of smoke hit me. Not campfire smoke, but wildfire, pine and ash, and that heavy chemical tinge. I came around a bend and saw the glow, and then a cluster of tents and trucks. A fire crew was camped just off the road, maybe 20 people in all. Some were sitting around eating, a few walking between tents. I walked straight into their camp and asked if I could set up behind them, just out of the way. I told them I was a CDT hiker and needed a safe spot for the night. They looked me over, nodded, and pointed to a patch of grass near the edge of their site. I pitched my tent fast and crawled in, heart still racing. 10 minutes later, I saw him walk past. Same guy. He didn't look over, just kept walking, head down, arms swinging. He didn't say anything, didn't try to come into the crew's camp, just walked by on the road, heading toward town. I didn't sleep much. Every sound made me twitch. I kept my knife in the pocket of my quilt. I wasn't sure if he'd doubled back or was waiting somewhere. At first light, I packed up, thanked the fire crew, and headed straight into Winter Park. I got a room at a cheap motel and stayed locked inside. I kept looking over my shoulder every time I went out, for food, gear, whatever. 2 days later, I hitched into Grand Lake and got off trail for a bit. Spent a few days wandering around, not doing much. I was shook up, couldn't stop replaying everything. The way he stuck close, the way he talked like we were hiking together whether I wanted to or not. That look on his face when I left him behind, like I'd betrayed him or something. I went down to Denver after that. Bummed around the city for nearly a week. Stayed in hostels, drank beer, watched people walk by on the street. After a while, the tension faded. The city has a way of swallowing you. Everyone's got somewhere to be, and nobody's watching you. I started thinking maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe the guy was just socially awkward. Maybe I should have just told him more directly to leave me alone. Still, something about it didn't sit right. That insistence. The way he ignored everything I said. The way he tried to push into my space like we were friends. Like it didn't matter what I wanted. When I finally got back on trail, I was paranoid for a few days. I'd glance behind me every half hour, checking the trail. I kept my headphones off, didn't zone out. I stopped camping near obvious sites and went farther off trail to find spots no one would see from the path. I asked every hiker I passed if they'd seen a guy matching his description. Mid-30s, beard, sun hoodie, kind of intense. No one had. Not a single person had seen him. Eventually, I stopped asking. I kept hiking. The CDT goes on for a long time, and there's too much beauty to stay afraid forever. But I never forgot the feeling of him behind me, matching my steps. And I never again let anyone hike behind me for more than a few minutes. If someone fell into step with me, I stopped and let them pass. Always. I still do on every hike since, just in case. I'd been looking forward to this hike for months. It was a quiet Saturday morning in late September, just cool enough to wear a light jacket, the kind of day that makes you feel like something good is waiting out there in the woods. I had my pack loaded the night before, just the basics. Water, a couple sandwiches, a headlamp, a small first aid kit, a cheap compass I never really used but liked having anyway. I parked off the shoulder of the old service road around 7:30 a.m. and started walking into the woods, past the rusted-out remains of what used to be someone's fence line. Most of the area had been part of a small mining town in the early 1900s, long abandoned now. Nothing but foundations and broken bricks left in the dirt. I'd found the route online from a guy who'd posted GPS tracks. Said it was challenging but worth it. Not many people went as far in as I planned to that day. To get to the heart of the old town, you had to cross a creek 3 times. Not at shallow points either. The only way across was over a series of fallen trees that had been there so long they felt like part of the trail. You had to balance carefully, especially with a pack. Some parts were slippery with moss, but I liked that about it. It felt like I was really leaving everything behind the further I went. By the time I crossed the 3rd log bridge, the sounds of the road, even the distant hum of any towns, were completely gone. Just trees, birds, wind. I walked for maybe an hour past the 3rd crossing. No phone signal out there, but I checked my map and compass to stay on track. I passed the crumbled wall of what used to be a small building. Maybe a store or post office, hard to say. Just a low rectangle of bricks now, nearly swallowed by vines and brush. I stopped there for a bit to eat half a sandwich and drink some water. Everything was still. Even the birds seemed to be keeping quiet. I didn't think much of it at the time. Another 30 minutes in, I started heading uphill toward what used to be a small schoolhouse, or so I'd read. You could barely make out the steps in the hill where the foundation used to sit. That's when I saw it. Something bright blue ahead, just off the trail and up to the right. It stood out like a flare against all the muted greens and browns of the woods. I squinted, thinking maybe it was just a tarp or some trash someone had left behind. But as I got closer, I could tell it wasn't that. There was a man, an older man, maybe in his 60s, sitting in the crook of a large tree about 10 feet off the ground. He was wearing bright blue satin pajamas. Not flannel, not sweats. Actual shiny satin pajamas like something from a hotel or sleepwear ad from the 50s. He had no shoes. His feet were bare and clean looking. The first thing that struck me wasn't the strangeness of his clothes or how he got up there. It was how groomed he looked. His white hair was neatly combed. His nails looked clipped. His hands rested in his lap like he was waiting for someone. He smiled, not in a friendly way, but not exactly menacing either. Just watching. And then he started laughing. It wasn't loud, not hysterical, not the kind of laugh you'd call crazy, but it wasn't right either. It came in slow, steady pulses, like a quiet chuckle that didn't belong out here. I don't know how to describe it. It wasn't a joke kind of laugh. It was like he was laughing at something I didn't understand. That set off something in my gut. I didn't say anything to him, didn't ask if he was okay or if he needed help. I just gave him a nod as I passed, trying not to show how much it unsettled me. He kept laughing, steady and soft, until I was about 20 feet past him. Then it stopped, just cut off. No tapering, just silence. I turned around. The tree was empty, no sound of movement, no rustling branches, no footsteps or leaves crunching. Nothing, just gone. The forest was still, but now it felt wrong, like the silence had weight to it. I stood there for a while, scanning the underbrush, trying to spot any sign of where he could have gone. But there was nothing. The ground beneath the tree was covered in leaves and twigs. No marks, no footprints, no broken branches. I know what I saw. He didn't jump down. He didn't climb higher. He didn't move into the trees. He was just gone. For a few minutes I stood there, debating what to do. My instinct told me to turn back. 5 miles into the woods with no phone service, the only way out the same narrow path I came in on. But I hadn't planned on coming all this way just to turn around early, and a part of me didn't want to admit that the old man had shaken me that badly. Maybe it was some weirdo camping out here. Maybe he was some eccentric survivalist or just some guy with mental health issues who liked being alone. I didn't know. I told myself not to make a big deal out of it, but I couldn't ignore the feeling in my chest. That low buzzing pressure that said something about this was off in a way I couldn't explain. I kept going but slower, checking over my shoulder now and then. I couldn't shake the thought that I hadn't heard him move, not even a twig snap. I made it to the ridge near the schoolhouse ruins and sat for a while. I wasn't hungry anymore, but I forced myself to eat something, tried to make sense of it. I thought about turning back right then, but I figured maybe I'd walk just another half mile to this rocky overlook I'd read about, get a few pictures, then head back. But the entire time I felt watched. It wasn't just nerves. I've hiked alone dozens of times. I've run into weird things, Animal bones, odd shelters, even other hikers acting strange, but never like this. I'd always felt some control over those situations. This was different. I felt like whatever had happened back at that tree wasn't over yet. At the overlook, I stood there for maybe 2 minutes. I couldn't enjoy it. I felt exposed, like I had a spotlight on me. I turned around and started back. I didn't run, but I moved fast. My legs were stiff and I kept hearing sounds behind me. Light ones. Maybe branches clicking or something brushing against leaves. Each time I stopped, the forest went dead silent again. Not even birds. Crossing the log bridges on the way back felt 10 times harder. My balance was off. My legs were shaking. On the second crossing, I actually slipped and scraped my knee trying to steady myself, almost went into the creek. I remember swearing loudly and just sitting there for a moment, clutching the bark with both hands like it would keep me grounded. Once I got across the third and final bridge, I felt like I could breathe again. Still had a few miles left to the car, but at least I was out of the deeper part of the woods. The feeling of being watched didn't go away entirely, but it faded. I made it back to my car just after 3 p.m., threw my pack into the back seat, sat behind the wheel for a few minutes with the door open, just listening. Nothing. No sign of anyone. That night I couldn't sleep, not because I thought I was in danger anymore, but because I couldn't shake the image of that man. How he looked too clean, too out of place. How he vanished without a sound. How he was even up in that tree to begin with. I've gone over it 100 times since then. Could he have jumped down when I looked away? Maybe, but I would have heard something. The ground was dry, lots of underbrush. Even a squirrel makes noise out there, and he didn't make a sound. Could it have been someone playing a prank? Maybe, but who hikes 5 miles into rough terrain just to sit silently in a tree all day waiting for someone who might or might not come by? And why that outfit? I checked local news the next few days. Nothing about any missing people in the area. Nothing about someone acting strangely or being found in the woods. I even posted a short description online in a hiking forum to see if anyone else had seen him. No one had. It's been over a year now, and I haven't gone back to that trail. I still hike, but I stay closer to home, more populated places. Something about that day changed how I think about being alone in the woods. I used to feel like nature was peaceful, even with all its dangers. Now I'm not so sure. Sometimes I wake up at night and wonder if I would have seen him again if I'd stayed longer. If he was following me, if he's still out there, waiting in another tree for the next person to come by. Whatever the truth is, I know what I saw, and I don't think I'll ever understand it. In August of 2019, I set out on what I expected would be a long and slow journey across the United States, traveling not by car or by foot, but on a fully loaded touring bicycle. I had packed everything I'd need: tent, sleeping bag, stove, clothes, water filters, some tools, and planned to ride across the country, sleeping wherever I could. Sometimes that meant public campgrounds, sometimes the backyards of kind strangers, but most often it meant wild camping, just disappearing into the woods for the night, far from any roads, any people, any lights. I didn't mind the solitude. In fact, I usually preferred it. By the end of September, I was in Montana. I'd crossed over from North Dakota a few days earlier, riding through small towns and long stretches of prairie, forest, and high plains. There weren't many cars and even fewer people. The landscape had started to change. The forests were thicker, the air was cooler, and the nights were coming earlier. I was deep into the rhythm of the road by then. Wake up at sunrise, pack up camp, eat a quick breakfast of oats or instant coffee, ride 50 or 60 miles depending on the terrain, then start looking for a spot to camp as the sun started dipping low. On this particular day, I'd ended my ride just outside a small town. I don't remember the name, something with a population under 300. The kind of place where the gas station is also the grocery store, post office, and diner. I'd refilled my water bottles and bought a can of chili for dinner, then pedaled back out toward the wilderness. I followed a gravel road that turned into a dirt track, then finally wheeled my bike into the woods a little before dusk. I always tried to set up my tent far enough off the road that no one could see it by accident. I wasn't doing anything illegal, but I also didn't want company. I found a good spot on a gentle rise, a bit of cleared space among the trees, far enough away from any trails or tracks. There were no signs of human activity, no beer cans, no footprints, no tire marks, just dry pine needles, golden grass, and fallen branches. I leaned my bike against a tree, unstrapped the bags, and set up the tent. As the sun dropped behind the trees, I boiled some water for the chili, ate it with a piece of bread I'd saved from the day before, brushed my teeth, and scribbled in my little notebook. It had become a habit, just a couple of sentences about where I was and what I'd seen that day, a way to mark the time and later to remember it. By the time I zipped up my tent and slid into my sleeping bag, the last of the daylight was gone. The inside of the tent was dark except for the dim red glow of my headlamp. I read for a few minutes, then turned it off and lay back. Usually, sleeping in the woods didn't bother me. The sounds of the forest were like a kind of comfort blanket: crickets, frogs, leaves rustling in the breeze, the occasional distant bark of a coyote or hoot of an owl. I'd gotten used to all of it, even the sounds of larger animals. Deer, raccoons, porcupines, they were part of the background, expected and explainable. And usually, if there was a sound I couldn't immediately identify, it would come again in a way that helped me figure out what it was. It's amazing how good your ears get when you spend that much time alone outside. But that night felt different from the start. As I lay in my sleeping bag, I realized there was no sound, not a single one. No crickets, no wind, no frogs, nothing. It wasn't just quiet, it was dead silent. So silent that it almost had a pressure to it, like my ears were plugged. I took off my beanie, thinking maybe that was muffling things. Nothing changed. I held my breath. Still nothing. No rustling, no night birds. Just silence. At first, I figured maybe it was just one of those moments, like the calm before a breeze starts up again. I turned over in my sleeping bag, adjusting my pillow, trying to get comfortable. But even the sound of my own movement seemed too loud, like I was disrupting something sacred. It made me hesitate. I lay still for a long while, just listening, but there was still nothing. The silence stretched on. Then, after maybe 10 or 15 minutes, I heard it, a sharp snap like a stick breaking underfoot. It was close, maybe 30 or 40 feet away. I froze. It wasn't a squirrel or a rabbit. The sound was too distinct, too heavy. Then it was quiet again. Now, normally a twig snapping wouldn't scare me. Animals move around, branches fall. But what got to me that night was the silence around it. There were no background noises to drown it out. No wind, no insects, no distant traffic. It felt like the whole forest was holding its breath, and that single sound punched right through it. A few minutes later, another snap, then a rustle, then nothing again. I reached slowly for my headlamp and turned it on inside the tent, keeping the beam pointed down. I didn't want to shine it outside just yet. The light gave me something to focus on: my gear, my little stove, the crumpled snack wrappers. I was looking for something to make me feel grounded, normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching. I know how that sounds, but it was real. The feeling of being observed was so heavy I could almost feel it on my skin. I clicked off the light and listened. Another sound, closer. It was a faint crunch of leaves or needles, maybe 10 or 15 feet away, off to the left. Then a long pause. I was holding my breath again. My body was tense, every muscle tight, like I was waiting for a signal to run. I had bear spray next to me, always kept it close when camping, especially in grizzly country. I slid it into my sleeping bag and clutched it tight. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. I wasn't going to unzip the tent or make any noise that might draw attention. I just lay there, heart pounding in my ears, waiting. Time passed slowly. 10 minutes, 20, maybe more. I started to doubt myself. Maybe I'd imagined how close it was. Maybe it was just a deer or even a branch falling. That's what I wanted to believe. I told myself that over and over, but the silence was still there. Oppressive. Wrong. Sometime around midnight, I finally dozed off. Just a light sleep, barely there. The kind where any sound snaps you right back awake. And that's what happened. There was a distinct thump. Not outside, underneath. Under my tent. I woke instantly, eyes wide, not moving. It was a short, dull pressure, like something had stepped on the ground right beside me or under me. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stared into the dark. Then another, slightly off to the right. Thud. Then nothing. I lay like that for what felt like hours, my mind spinning. What the hell was that? I knew there weren't any caves or tunnels. It had to be something on the surface. But why didn't it make more noise? Why was it so calculated? At some point, maybe around 2 or 3 a.m., I realized I hadn't heard a single natural sound all night. No return of the wind, no insects, nothing. The entire forest was mute. Eventually, I must have passed out from sheer exhaustion. When I woke up, the tent was bright with morning light and everything felt normal again. Birds were chirping. I could hear the wind blowing through the trees. A squirrel barked somewhere behind me. The silence had lifted, like a weight removed. I stepped outside, stiff and sore, and did a slow circle around my tent. There weren't any clear footprints, nothing obvious. The pine needles were too thick to catch a clean track. But about 20 feet away, I found a rock, flat, about the size of a dinner plate, leaning up at an odd angle. I couldn't remember seeing it the night before. It looked like it had been placed that way. Not kicked, not fallen, placed. It was probably nothing, but after the night I'd had, it felt significant. Out of place. Deliberate. I packed up quickly. No coffee, no journal entry. I just loaded everything onto the bike and pedaled out of the woods as fast as I could manage. Back to the road, back to town. I didn't even look back. For the rest of the trip, another few thousand miles, I never experienced a night quite like that again. Sure, there were moments of unease, strange sounds in the dark, weird encounters with people, but nothing ever matched that silence. That night in Montana was the most unnatural feeling I've ever had in the outdoors, and I've spent a lot of time alone in wild places. I don't know what was out there. Maybe it was just an animal, curious or confused. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe the silence just played tricks on my brain. But something about that night didn't fit with the rest of the world. And even now, years later, when I sleep in a tent or in the back of my truck, I still think about that night. About the silence. About the feeling of being watched. And about how sometimes the scariest thing isn't what you hear in the dark. It's what you don't. I left the house around 7 a.m. that morning. It was early December, and while the calendar said winter, the weather still felt like fall back in town. Roughly 45 degrees, maybe a little cooler with the wind. I had packed light, confident in my layers and gear. My plan was to do a 16-mile hike up a mountain I'd climbed before, but this time I wanted to try a different route. A lesser-known one that split off from the main trail a few miles in. I'd read about it a while back, but I didn't remember the details as well as I should have. Still, I figured I knew the mountain well enough and I was used to hiking year-round. I wasn't worried. I had my day pack with the basics, some high-calorie snacks, water, flint stick, flashlight, a small med kit, gloves, hat, and a couple extra layers. I left my map at home, thinking I'd downloaded the GPX file of the route, but when I checked my phone, the offline map hadn't saved. It annoyed me a little, but I brushed it off. I had a general sense of direction, and this wasn't my first hike. Besides, I had my dog with me. She was a good trail companion, smart and steady. She always stuck close and was good at picking up on trails even when they got faint. The first few miles were uneventful. It was cold but not unbearable, and the ground had a thin crust of old snow here and there, nothing fresh. We moved at a decent pace. The trail was narrow and wound gradually upward through a patchwork of bare aspens and darker pine forest. I passed a couple old trail markers early on, but by the time I veered off the main route, I hadn't seen another person in a while. This wasn't a popular trail, and that's exactly why I had chosen it. Couple hours in, the snow started. Just flurries at first, light, dry flakes drifting down through the trees. I paused, adjusted my jacket, and kept going. I wasn't surprised. Colorado weather is unpredictable, especially in the mountains. The forecast had mentioned a chance of flurries, which basically meant you could either get a light dusting or a full-blown squall. Still, it didn't look like much, and I wasn't far from where I thought the offshoot trail should start to curve back toward the main route on the other side of the ridge. I pushed ahead, and the flurries grew thicker. The air felt heavier. I noticed that the trail was harder to follow now. The snow had started covering up prints, my own, and those of whatever animals had passed through recently. My dog seemed confused too, occasionally stopping and sniffing the ground, her ears back slightly. She didn't seem panicked, just alert. I trusted her instincts, but something was off. After another mile or so, I realized the trail had completely vanished beneath the snow, not just covered, gone. The trees closed in tighter around me, and the snow began falling faster. I stopped and looked around, turning in a slow circle. The world was quiet, eerily quiet, like the snow had muffled all sound. No birds, no wind, no distant hum of planes or roads, just the crunch of my boots and the soft thump of snow hitting my hood. It hit me then. I wasn't on a trail anymore. I stood still for a few moments, hoping something would look familiar. A log I passed earlier, a turn in the path. Nothing did. I pulled my phone out of my jacket, thinking I could check my location, but of course, no service. And the map I'd meant to download wasn't there. All I had was a blinking blue dot on a blank screen. Useless. I swore under my breath, then looked at my dog. She was standing a few feet ahead of me, staring into the trees. I called her back and gave her a quick drink from my water bottle. She was calm, but she kept glancing uphill. It made sense. I had been climbing the whole time. If I kept going up, maybe I'd reach a clearing or some kind of vantage point. I started moving again uphill, aiming for higher ground. I tried to walk in as straight a line as I could, but without any trail, I had to weave around thick brush and fallen trees. The snow kept falling, harder now. My jacket was wet at the shoulders. My gloves were damp. I adjusted my pack, trying to stay balanced. I wasn't scared exactly, but I was annoyed, mad at myself for getting careless, mad that I hadn't told anyone where I was going. After about 30 or 40 minutes of steady climbing, I came into a small clearing. The snow was knee-deep by now, and the sky was a solid sheet of gray. But from the edge of the clearing, I could see across a valley, and there it was, the peak, the mountain I was supposed to be on. Its rocky summit was barely visible through the curtain of snow, but I recognized the shape. I had stood on top of it before. That gave me a much-needed jolt of reassurance. I pulled out my flint stick. It had a cheap little compass glued to the end. Not exactly military grade, but better than nothing. I took a rough azimuth from where I stood, trying to line up with the direction of the peak. My thinking was simple. If I could dead reckon my way toward that summit, I'd eventually intersect one of the real trails. Probably the main one that looped around the east side of the peak. At least that was the plan. I didn't want to use my phone unless I had to. Cold kills battery fast, and if things got worse, I'd want every percentage point I could save. I zipped it away, took one last look at the peak, and started moving. The hike down from the clearing was tough. There was no trail, just trees, drifts of snow, and the slope of the mountain working against me. I tripped more than once. My legs were burning from the effort. My dog stayed close, occasionally bounding ahead and looking back like she was checking on me. The snow stung my face and melted down my neck. I kept adjusting the compass and correcting my path. My pace slowed. I was burning more energy than I realized. The forest was thicker on this side of the ridge. At one point, I walked straight into a stand of pine that was so dense I had to duck and push through like a tunnel. Branches grabbed at my clothes. Snow dumped down my back. I slipped, hit my knee on a rock hidden beneath the snow, and had to sit for a few seconds and catch my breath. My heart was pounding. Not from panic, just exhaustion and frustration. I checked the compass again and kept going. After what felt like forever, probably 3 miles or more, I saw it, a trail. Real packed dirt beneath the snow. It looked faint, but it had that unmistakable man-made curve. It wasn't the main trail, but it was a trail. Relief flooded through me. I knelt down and brushed some snow aside, trying to figure out if it was going the direction I needed. Based on the slope and the position of the peak, it seemed right, so I followed it. The trail gradually widened and curled to the left. The snow had let up slightly, now falling in slow, heavy flakes. I moved faster now, comforted by the feel of the packed ground beneath my boots. I recognized a fallen tree I'd seen on my last trip here, months earlier. Then another landmark, a wide rock outcrop, a bent pine tree. Slowly, I began to feel confident again. Eventually, the trail intersected with the main one, the route I knew well. I almost laughed when I saw the weathered wooden marker sticking out of the snow like a flag. My dog wagged her tail and shook snow off her back. We paused there for a few minutes. I drank the last of my water and ate a protein bar that had gone stiff in the cold. My legs ached. My face was wind-chapped, but I knew where I was now, and I knew the summit was maybe an hour away. So I kept going. The final push was hard. The wind picked up as I gained elevation, and the trail disappeared again beneath the snow, but I didn't care. The shape of the land was familiar, the bare patches of rock, the way the wind cut across the saddle before the final climb. My lungs burned, and my fingers were starting to lose feeling in my gloves, but I didn't stop. I reached the summit just before 4 p.m. The sky had begun to break open a little, and a faint glow of orange filtered through the gray. I stood at the top, breathing hard, my dog at my side, both of us coated in snow. I pulled out my phone, finally, and checked for signal. 1 bar, then 2. I quickly texted my friends, dropped a pin, and sent it. Then I downloaded the map like I should have done that morning. Took a while with the weak signal, but it worked. I sat down on a flat rock near the summit and just breathed. It had been nearly 22 miles total, much more than I planned for. My legs were jelly. My jacket was soaked through, but I'd made it. I sat there until the cold forced me to move. I knew I didn't have long before it got dark, and I wasn't going to push my luck on the descent. I got up, stretched, checked my phone again, still had battery, and started back down the familiar trail, heading toward the main parking lot where I'd left my truck. I made it to the trailhead a little after 6:30, just as the last light was fading. The snow was lighter down low, and I could see the shape of my truck under a thin dusting. I loaded the dog into the cab, blasted the heat, and just sat for a minute with my eyes closed. By the time I got back into town, I was late, but I still made it to dinner. I told my friends the short version of the story, left out the stupid parts.